Before we start, buckle up. What you're about to witness is a real-life prison break that challenged an entire county, rattled a nation, and exposed the cracks in a system built for containment. If you think you're ready, hit subscribe, like this video, and step inside the wall. The making of a fugitive. On July 3, 1989, in Estreito, Maranhão, Brazil, Danelo Cavalcante was born. He would eventually find his way to the United States, but not before leaving behind a violent trail in Brazil. In April 2021, in Schuylkill Township, Pennsylvania, he brutally stabbed his ex-girlfriend, Deborah Brandao, 38 times, in front of her two young children. By mid-August 2023, he stood convicted of first-degree murder. On August 22, 2023, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But only days later, while awaiting transfer to a state correctional facility, his story would take an unimaginable turn, one that exposed deep vulnerabilities within the system and set off one of the most intense manhunts in modern American history. The prison. Chester County Prison, located in Pocopson Township, Pennsylvania, was a county-run facility with a capacity of about 1,100 inmates. It had two large outdoor exercise yards, both enclosed by high walls topped with razor wire, and a roof above the perimeter. Only months earlier, another inmate, Igor Bolt, had escaped using the very same wall. Though he was quickly captured, officials had assured the public the issue was fixed. Razor wire had been added, but the upgrades were incomplete. A sense of false security hung over the prison. On the surface, it looked fortified, but beneath that, flaws waited to be exploited. The morning of the escape, August 31, 2023. It was a Thursday morning, just before 8:30 a.m., when Cavalcante's unit entered the exercise yard for their scheduled time. Moments later, surveillance footage captured something almost impossible. The small-built inmate pressed his feet against one wall and his hands against another, crab-walking his way vertically upward, inch by inch. He reached the top, maneuvered over the razor wire, and disappeared across the roof. From there, he leapt down to freedom, completely unseen by the tower guard. The escape went undetected for over an hour. By the time a routine head count revealed his absence, the alarm was raised. It was 9:48 a.m. Lockdown began immediately. But by then, the convicted murderer had vanished beyond the walls. The chase begins. Police flooded the area. Roadblocks were set up. Tactical units, K-9 teams, helicopters, and drones descended upon Chester County and its surrounding forests. The landscape was vast, wooded, suburban, and interconnected. It was perfect terrain for a man who knew how to hide. 2 days later, a homeowner's security camera caught him moving through a backyard, shirtless, carrying a bag. Every news sighting only deepened the public fear. Schools closed. Residents locked themselves indoors. Helicopters circled through the night. This was no longer a prison escape. It was a community on edge, living under the shadow of a man who had nothing left to lose. The psychology of the escape. Cavalcante's decision to break out wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. It was a calculated gamble born of desperation. He had no future, no parole, no second chance. To him, escape was survival. He'd likely studied the prison's weak points for months, possibly inspired by the earlier escape that had revealed a viable path. He watched, waited, and executed, exploiting both the physical structure and human oversight. Once outside, he adapted quickly. He changed clothes, traveled through woods and neighborhoods, and managed to stay just close enough to scavenge supplies without being cornered. He was thinking, learning, and surviving, a fugitive operating in his element. The fallout. The public demanded answers. How could the same wall be used twice for an escape? Why hadn't the guard seen him? Officials scrambled to respond. Within weeks, Chester County Prison announced sweeping changes: full enclosures for exercise yards, reinforced roofs, and upgraded cameras. But the damage was done. A convicted murderer had made the system look weak, and in doing so, exposed the cracks in a structure designed to prevent exactly this. Cavalcante's escape also carried a personal cost. The family of his victim was forced to relive their trauma, fearing what might happen if he returned. The community lived under constant tension, wondering if the next noise outside was just the wind or something worse. As the sun set that evening, the prison yard looked no different than it had that morning: quiet, empty, routine. But one inmate was missing. One alarm had sounded, and an entire county was about to lose sleep. Somewhere beyond the trees, Danelo Cavalcante crouched in the dark, heart racing, eyes scanning the forest edge. Every minute he remained free, the pressure built. For him, for law enforcement, for everyone watching. Tomorrow, the chase would escalate. The nation would watch, and the hunter would become the hunted. If you think this was intense, you haven't seen half of it. Hit subscribe. The sun had barely risen over Chester County, Pennsylvania, when the sirens faded into the distance. But for thousands of residents, the nightmare was only beginning. After the 9:48 a.m. headcount on August 31st confirmed that Danilo Cavalcante was missing, panic erupted inside the prison walls. Corrections officers scrambled, replaying surveillance footage until, frame by frame, they saw the unthinkable, a man scaling between two walls, pressing his feet and hands in an acrobatic crab walk, vanishing over razor wire. For several minutes, silence reigned in the control room. He just disappeared, one officer later told investigators. It looked like a stunt from an action movie, except it was real. By 10 a.m., Pennsylvania State Police and U.S. Marshals were on scene. The first perimeter was set within a 2-mile radius of the prison. Roads were blocked, helicopters circled, and K-9 units fanned out through the dense suburban woods. But the man they were hunting, 5 foot tall, wiry, and desperate, had already vanished into the tangle of trees and cornfields west of Pocopson Township. The area around Chester County Prison is deceptive. Quiet farmlands, rolling hills, dense underbrush, and a network of creeks and culverts. In early September, the woods are thick with late summer foliage. Visibility is low, sound travels unevenly, and there are endless places to hide. Investigators later determined that Cavalcante knew the area intimately. During his trial, he'd been transported back and forth along those same roads. From the prison yard, he could see the tree line that offered his escape route. He had, in effect, memorized his own battlefield. On September 1st, a state police helicopter detected a heat signature about 1.5 miles from the prison. Officers moved in, but by the time they reached the spot, the figure had slipped away. Later that evening, a resident's home surveillance camera caught him moving across the backyard, still in the white prison uniform, carrying a backpack. Within 48 hours, tips poured in. Someone saw a man crouching near a stream. A homeowner found food missing from a shed. A dog barked wildly near a patch of woods. Police expanded the search perimeter, deploying drones, mounted units, and hundreds of officers. Yet each time they closed in, Cavalcante evaded them, crawling through drainage ditches, covering himself in mud, and moving only at night. He's small, he's agile, he's desperate, and he's surviving on instinct, said one official. This man is extremely dangerous, and we're not taking any chances. By September 5th, fear had consumed Chester County. Schools closed for multiple days. Residents were ordered to keep their doors locked and vehicles secured. At one point, a woman called 911 to report a man breaking into her kitchen. Police arrived to find footprints on her counter and open peanut butter jars. Neighbors began forming informal watch groups, scanning their yards with flashlights and drones. Local stores ran out of batteries, flashlights, and bottled water. Helicopters thundered overhead day and night. It wasn't just a search anymore, it was a siege. On September 8th, 9 days after the escape, authorities received a chilling lead. Cavalcante had been spotted near Longwood Gardens, an enormous botanical preserve about 3 miles from the prison. Trail cameras captured him walking through the forest, clean-shaven, wearing a stolen hoodie, and carrying a duffel bag. How did he manage to stay so composed, so prepared? Investigators learned that during his first week on the run, he'd broken into multiple sheds and garages, stealing clothing, food, and a stolen backpack. He even used a razor he found to shave his beard, changing his appearance just enough to buy himself time. Each new photo circulated online felt like a taunt, a message that he was always one step ahead. The governor held press conferences, promising the public that Cavalcante's capture was imminent. More than 400 law enforcement personnel joined the hunt, including U.S. Marshals, SWAT teams, and Border Patrol trackers skilled in wilderness pursuit. But the psychological strain was immense. Every failed search meant another sleepless night for residents. Children whispered about the man in the woods. One homeowner woke to find boot prints under her window. Even police morale began to waver. "You think you've got him cornered," said one officer. "But he moves like smoke." On the night of September 10th, the story took a deadly turn. Cavalcante broke into a garage in South Coventry Township and stole a .22 caliber rifle fitted with a scope and flashlight. The homeowner confronted him, firing several shots, but missed. Cavalcante escaped again, now armed and more dangerous than ever. Police raised the alert to tactical threat. Roadblocks expanded to 25 square miles. SWAT units began sweeping homes door to door. Residents were told to stay inside at all costs. "He's not just an escapee anymore," one commander warned. "He's an armed fugitive." By day 12, officers believed Cavalcante was heading north, possibly toward the border. But his movements were erratic. He stole a delivery van, drove it for several miles, and abandoned it near East Nantmeal Township. Each time he moved, he risked exposure. Yet somehow, he kept slipping through cracks. The manhunt became a chess match played in real time, broadcast across every screen in America. Social media exploded with theories, memes, and sightings, some real, some false. The story captured the world's attention. How can a convicted killer, 5 feet tall, outsmart hundreds of trained officers for 2 weeks? It wasn't just the escape that stunned people, it was the endurance. By September 12th, authorities had tightened the perimeter once again, this time in northern Chester County. Dozens of tactical officers, K-9s, and thermal imaging drones scanned the dense forest. The night was humid and eerily silent. Then, at 1 a.m. on September 13th, a surveillance aircraft detected a heat signature beneath the trees. Teams moved in quietly, forming a circle. Cavalcante, armed with the stolen rifle, was asleep under a pile of leaves. As dawn broke, tactical officers closed in. A K-9 named Yoda lunged forward, biting his arm as officers tackled him to the ground. "We had to use controlled force," said one officer. He resisted, but no shots were fired. It was over in seconds. At 8 a.m., Danelo Cavalcante was in custody. Photos released hours later showed him in handcuffs, his prison jumpsuit torn, dirt covering his body. The same man who had defied an entire state's manhunt for 14 days. For Pennsylvania, the sigh of relief was palpable. For the nation, it was an extraordinary example of how one man, with desperation, cunning, and timing, could challenge the system itself. Cavalcante was transferred to SCI Phoenix, a maximum security facility. Chester County prison officials faced disciplinary investigations. One corrections officer was fired for failing to notice the escape. Within months, the prison fully enclosed its exercise yards and installed additional watchtowers. The governor commended the tactical teams. Every resource was used, every inch searched. Justice is once again secured. But the questions lingered. How did this happen again? Why weren't warnings about his escape plans taken seriously? And what does this say about complacency inside America's prisons? In the calm that followed, the forests of Chester County looked peaceful again. But for 2 weeks, they had echoed with fear, helicopters, and the footsteps of a fugitive. Families still remember the sleepless nights, the feeling that danger lurked behind every tree. And in every retelling, one image stands out. A man pressing his feet against 2 concrete walls, defying gravity, and clawing his way toward freedom. A few seconds of footage that reminded the world. Even in the most fortified places, human determination can find a way out. If you've followed this story from the start, you've already seen what desperation can do to a man. But what drove Danelo Cavalcante to scale concrete walls, crawl through shadows, and outwit an entire state? Let's go deeper into the mind of the escapee. Danilo Souza Cavalcante was born in 1989 in Tocantins, Brazil, a quiet, rural region carved by heat, farmland, and poverty. He was one of 6 siblings, a child who learned early that survival wasn't a choice, it was instinct. He left school young, working odd jobs, restless and short-tempered. People who knew him described 2 faces. One, the charming, helpful neighbor. The other, volatile, jealous, and frighteningly impulsive. In 2017, he fled Brazil after allegedly shooting a man dead during an argument over unpaid debt. Brazilian police filed a warrant for his arrest. But Danilo vanished, heading north, crossing through Panama and Mexico, and eventually entering the United States illegally. He settled in Chester County, Pennsylvania, a quiet, working-class community. He worked construction, spoke little English, and tried to disappear into the background. But his past and his temper followed him. In April 2021, neighbors heard screams echoing through the streets of Schuylkill Township. Moments later, a woman collapsed in her driveway, stabbed multiple times. Her name was Deborah Brandeo, a 33-year-old mother of two. Witnesses said Cavalcante attacked her in front of her children before fleeing on foot. He was arrested hours later, hiding in a nearby field. Investigators quickly learned who he really was: a fugitive from Brazil wanted for another murder. 2 countries, 2 victims, 1 man. During his 2023 trial, prosecutors called him a predator who kills when he can't control. When the verdict was read, life without parole, he showed no emotion. But those inside the courtroom said his eyes were calculating, almost detached. He wasn't thinking about punishment. He was already thinking about escape. In July 2023, just weeks before the escape, a Chester County correctional officer submitted a report warning that Cavalcante had been planning an escape. He was seen studying the prison yard walls, observing guard patterns, and asking questions about schedules. The report was reviewed and filed away. No additional security measures were taken. That's the kind of detail that later enraged the public. Because Cavalcante didn't stumble upon opportunity, he engineered it. He studied, memorized, rehearsed. And then, one humid morning, he turned imagination into action. What makes a man risk everything to scale a wall under the watch of armed guards? Psychologists who study escape behavior say it comes down to 2 drives: control and survival. After a lifetime of being trapped by poverty, by guilt, by walls, Cavalcante was obsessed with control. The crab walk wasn't just a stunt. It was a statement. When a prisoner has nothing left to lose, one criminologist noted, even impossible odds start to look like freedom. During those 2 weeks in the Pennsylvania woods, Cavalcante reverted to his most primal state: hunter and hunted. He stole fruit, raw corn, and bottled water, slept under logs and construction tarps, used streams to wash off scent to avoid K-9 units. He didn't speak to anyone. He avoided technology. He became almost invisible, the embodiment of instinct. When police finally captured him, investigators said he had lost nearly 15 pounds. But his eyes were alive, sharp, unbroken. He didn't look like a defeated man. He looked like someone who had tasted freedom, even if only for a moment. In the weeks after the capture, the shock turned to outrage. How could a maximum security facility allow this to happen, especially after prior warnings? The footage of the crab walk became viral. News anchors, late-night hosts, and security experts dissected every frame. It wasn't just sensational, it was humiliating. In the digital age, even fugitives become headlines. Cavalcante's story exploded across social media. #crabwalk trended worldwide. TikToks, memes, and YouTube analyses turned him into a strange mix of villain and anti-hero. But behind the viral fame lay a darker truth: 2 families destroyed, 2 nations haunted by his name. In Brazil, where his first victim's relatives still live, his escape reignited rage. They watched from afar as the man who had killed once and killed again was celebrated online for outsmarting the system. "He's not clever," said one relative. "He's just evil and lucky." After the capture, forensic psychologists interviewed Cavalcante to understand his motives. What they found was chilling: not madness, but method. He admitted that he had studied other prison breaks. He knew about El Chapo. He knew about Richard Matt and David Sweat from the 2015 Dannemora escape. He said he was always thinking about it, even during mealtime. They asked if he thought he'd succeed. He smiled and said, "I already did." That's the mindset of someone who sees confinement as temporary. For Danelo, the prison wasn't a cage. It was a challenge waiting to be beaten. After the investigation, officials identified multiple failures. Yard guards had limited visibility. Cameras were outdated. Razor wire was improperly positioned. Reports about his behavior were dismissed. Every step of the way, oversight had opened a door, and Danelo walked right through it. The escape forced a nationwide review of small and medium security prisons. Dozens of facilities began reinforcing barriers and retraining officers. But still, one truth remained: no system can ever fully contain desperation. For many, that 2-week manhunt wasn't just a news story. It was trauma that lingered long after the helicopters left. In an interview from prison, when asked what freedom felt like, Cavalcante paused for several seconds. Then he said quietly, like silence, the kind you only hear when no one knows where you are. That silence, brief, fragile, intoxicating, was the only victory he'd ever have. Now, locked inside a maximum security cell under 24-hour surveillance, that silence is gone forever. He'll never walk free again. But his escape will be studied, dissected, and remembered, not as an act of brilliance, but as a lesson carved into steel and concrete. For every officer who chased him, for every parent who stayed awake through the night, his 2 weeks of freedom cost something priceless: peace of mind. Walls can keep men in, but they can't keep desperation out. If you thought this story was intense, you're not ready for what's next. Hit subscribe, because the next escape might just be happening somewhere no one's watching.